I can't articulate how happy I am that you put it in those terms because I completely agree with you. In the same way that my channel suffered in no small part to the fact that I never wanted to settle on doing anything. I just wanted to do whatever took my fancy. And my only proviso was in the same way that I think you've conducted yourself based on the interviews that I've seen and a lot of the quotes you've given. I hold myself to a standard. I want to put out the best thing I can and I want to put it up against my standards. I don't want to look at what everyone else is doing and say, okay, well, that's the minimum, so that's what I'll do. It's no, I want to think of it from my own perspective and put the pieces in place where I think they should go, hone it where I think it should go, and then pursue it to the most of my ability so that it's good. And my only request is that you give it the same shake as you would do someone that you associate with the thing. And in your case, again, the fact that I didn't know you were an author, and I also didn't know that you wrote fiction and non-fiction. I would have, again, rightly or wrongly assumed that you'd been pigeonholed into doing sort of contemporary books about your experiences or that give insight into your knowledge about your various accolades and businesses. But the fact that you've then turned your hand to fiction, and again, you've done it a number of times and you've been quoted as being a bestseller, so I assume you're pretty good at it. That speaks to a thing of, multi-talents. But the question I have there then is what ultimately prompted you to do it for the first time? Was there a reservation on your part to do it, or was it a case of this is just the right opportunity at the right time to be able to start writing?
Well, I wrote my whole life. I from when I was a kid, I wrote in fifth grade is when I would do comic books and I would sell them, or stories.
You wrote comic books?
I mean, I took 10 pieces of paper, I folded it, I stapled it down the side, I created
me too.
Characters, and I drew them and I sold them for like 10 cents, 5, whatever the kids had.
I didn't sell them, so you're already ahead of me there.
At lunch. But that's what I would do. I would go and see a movie and it would inspire me to try and write a story thematically about something I saw, or to kind of take it, what I watched, to the next level. So I was filled with short stories and comics and all that stuff. My first novel I ever read in 6th grade, I remember sitting in class and my teacher was talking about books, and I guess someone in class was asking about a book, and his response was, he's like, well, if I wanted to read something really terrifying, I'd go get like Pet Sematary. That's all I had to hear. So I instead of eating that day, I ran down to the 5 and 10 and went to the paperback rack, and I found the new book, the new paperback Pet Sematary. It was the first book I ever read, cover to cover, and so I was always. I had my subscription to Fangoria magazine, and I was a horror film fan, and so I was bitten by that. But then there was always wrestling. It was just some stuff I did. They were never interrelated, and I went to college for film and television and radio, and I wanted to work in that field, and I did, and I was acting at the same time too, because I was having some luck in it, but my real passion was to be making films, and so I started directing television commercials. So it was all kind of happening at the same time, and I was watching wrestling while I was doing all of it. And then Anthony makes a suggestion to me about something nobody's ever done is do alternate commentary tracks for matches. And I was like, yeah, it's pretty cool. You can download them like on iTunes, just watch the match and listen to yourself sitting on the couch next to the Hockey Talk man who's walking you through that whole match. Cool idea. Let's start a company. Literally, I mean, that's what it was. And so there was never a big plan to get into that. I was in the entertainment business long before I started Kayfabe Commentaries. So
that's 31 years and 8 months to the day, according to a certain company.
But it's almost like I had the entertainment stuff there. I had the wife from the early days, the entertainment business, and here came this exciting thing, this fling called Kayfabe Commentaries, and somehow I walked that bitch to the altar, and here I am, like a Mormon, married. I visit this house when I have to satiate this, and then I go visit that house when I have to satiate that, right? You know, the wrestling stuff's here, and then the novel stuff's over here, and then the script, the TV writing stuff is over here. And you know who I would be interested to talk to? Maybe I should have him on the podcast. Freddie Prinze Jr., who was an actor for a long time, wrestling fan, and then got the opportunity to work creative in wrestling and did it. I just love to talk to him about his process, if it's similar to mine. I mean, he's far more successful than I, and better looking, and just a more worthwhile human being. But I would like to know if he has that struggle. If people from the one industry talk to the other, when I would be doing a film, I mean, that's the other thing too. We should mention I have 200 movie and television credits to my name also. That
came up in the research, yeah.
You just throw that in there. So I'd be doing something. I'd be at the studio, and somebody would be like, "Oh, I heard you're on a production company." And so then there were two hurdles before the word wrestling was ever uttered. This was the process. I had to decide on the process because they just don't understand. People don't understand wrestling.
No, of course not.
So the first hurdle was, I own a production company. That was the first one. Then it was, what do you produce? So the second hurdle was interview-based programming with professional athletes.
That sounds pretty good.
I might own ESPN if you hear that, right? So it could be anything. And then the dreaded, the third question, if they are engaged enough to say, tell me more, then I have to say, then the disclaimer comes out. I say, all right, it's professional wrestling. You get it or you don't. If you don't, go back to your script. If you do, I'll be happy to talk to you about it. Yeah, but there were two hurdles before the word wrestling was ever uttered.
Which is fair enough. But isn't it telling that some of the most successful entrepreneurs, especially in the early days of celebrity, the one that comes to mind is Arnold Schwarzenegger to me, because there's a guy who had his niche. He's a bodybuilder. That's it. Actually, no, he was a successfully.
Continue.
I didn't want to just say it. I have an intro written for you. It's in there too. I mean, do you want to just give away the finish here and I mean, you have it, by the way, so you can read your own big up if you'd like. But no, my point there is that bodybuilder, yes, but he was a successful businessman and entrepreneur before he ever started acting. Becomes an actor, then he gets into all sorts of different avenues of entertainment, and he's an early example of someone who was mega successful, and yet the concept of, like you said, Freddie Prinze Jr. is someone that I associate even tertiarily with just acting in gaming because of his voiceover work with gaming, and like the idea of him getting into wrestling is one of those things. It's like, oh, he's the actor guy getting into wrestling, as opposed to, well, I'll tell you what, before I judge him based on the predilection for acting, what's he doing? What has he done, and can I see what he's done to see if he's good at it? That's never the judgment. The judgment is always, I don't trust you to do this new thing because I don't associate you with the new thing, so I shan't validate this line of this line of inquiry. And it's an odd thing, isn't it? Considering if someone's exceptional in a field, do you not trust them to bring that level of professionalism, or at least that attention to detail, that skill, to another field? Like in your case, the fact that you're so skilled at putting together a production, is it really that surprising that you're that skilled, considering, again, the fact you've been writing for years, but articulating a story, or articulating a set of stories and anecdotes into a coherent beginning, middle, and end, so that, because that's a heavy subject, man. I plan on looking for that book where it's available, True Stories of Professional Wrestling Dads Facing Their Greatest Challenger, Parenthood, because that looks like it could be something that has some personal resonance to me, but also just knowing what I know about professional wrestlers in the limelight, but knowing very little about their stories, at home, for obvious reasons. You want to respect people's privacy, but that must have been a challenge to articulate, because that's a lot of heavy subject matter that you're trying to deal with, presumably.
I foolishly thought, after the success of the first book, Kayfabe, Stories You're Not Supposed to Hear from a Professional Wrestling Production Company Owner, get all those keywords in there.
I was going to say, that's amazing that you remembered the name word for word there. That's. I mean, you wrote it, but
title. You have to craft your title and your extension for keyword hits. So there's a science to why it looks like that. So I could have called it Kayfabe, but no one would have found it. So after the
Kayfabe, brother,
right. Kayfabe, brother. After the success of that, you know, number one bestseller in the wrestling category for the better part of 19 months. It's spellbinding when I say it, and it's true. I don't know how it happened or why it happened, but it did. So after that book, I thought, well, I can do it. I could do anything in the wrestling sphere now. I told my story in Kayfabe story. So I was at the theater. I was watching Hamilton and the scene between Alexander Hamilton and his son. And the difficulty, considering the difficulty for his son of who his father was and the enemies he was making. And I said, wow, I wonder if 10 fathers in wrestling would open up and give me the good, bad, and ugly of raising kids on the road. And that's where Father's Blood was born. And I wrote it. And Eric Bischoff is one person profiled, Tony Atlas, J.J. Dillon, Tito Santana. I talked to Bam Bam Bigelow's son about Bam Bam. So that was the perspective of the son talking about the father who was no longer with us. And in doing that, I thought there was something entertaining in it, that I could write it entertainingly, but really poignant and powerful. Some stuff would be funny, some stuff would be heartbreaking, and people who had never talked about parenthood before, like Kevin Sullivan was one of the people who allowed me to write his story and a story with his daughters. So I wrote it, and it was well received, got a wonderful blurb from Sports Illustrated on the cover of the book, and it didn't sell nearly the amount of copies as talking about Buff Bagwell showing up in no condition to perform for a shoot interview. That's the stuff. And it was funny, Todd Gordon, who, and this will come full circle, who I was letting read Kayfabe because we had done some shoot interview work together, and I talked to him about doing his autobiography, and we were going to do it. And at the last minute, he withdrew. He said, I can't do it right now in my life. I'm just not in the place right now. So I'm all jazzed up to write. So that's why I wrote Kayfabe, because I was all set to go with Todd. And we didn't do it. So I wrote the book, and I was sending him chapters. He was reading it. He was putting it over. And then I told him about Father's Blood. He said, oh, no. He said, big mistake. He said, they want the stories. That's why they bought that other book. I said, well, there's going to be stories. There's going to be stories about, first time, Kevin Sullivan dropped his kid off at Sunday school, and he plays the devil on TV, and he handed his kid over to the priest. It's a good story. He goes, no. Those aren't the stories they want. I was like, fuck that, whatever. So I always have to give him, and he always will still, to this day. We just finally did his autobiography, and he'll still say, well, it's no Father's Blood, but